Hello, everyone. Just to see, I see that it's right on 2 o'clock, but I know that it's we all get very time insistent with Teams, but let's just give it a couple more minutes if everyone doesn't mind. Thanks. Maybe just a couple housekeeping reminders just to make it easy for everyone, since we're going to have quite a large meeting. If people could keep your mics muted when you're not actually speaking. Thanks. Okay, well, we're at 2:01, but I have noticed that we've reached up to 116 participants, so I think that's pretty good. I'll just start with a few housekeeping items so that people who pop in a minute or two won't really have missed anything. We are very fortunate that we're going to have the DG with us, so when she joins us, she'll be speaking a few words, and we're really good that she's able to make time. We are recording this session. I think people saw the message that came up that said there was going to be recording. As I mentioned, please stay on mute unless you're taking the floor. What we'll be doing is, so I'm a big user of the chat. I know that this doesn't work for everybody because sometimes it can be distracting, but if you have a question and you want to just put it forward right away, go ahead and put it into the chat. And then one of the things that there is that function in the chat that people can upvote, give it a thumbs up. So if there's something that, if you're able to follow the chat a bit and you see a question you like, please feel free to give it an upvote. What we'll be doing is at the end of the presentation, first I'll be handing the floor to Laura Johnson, who is as you well know, is the president of the LS Sectoral Assembly. After that, we'll be opening the floor completely to have questions from everyone. And so first we'll take the questions in person when people raise your hand in Teams. If you're not sure where that is, you can just note in the chat or something, and we can indicate that. And then after we take those questions, if there's anything left, we'll go back and take questions on the sidebar. Unfortunately, I am going to have to end right at 3 because I have to go take my child to his vaccination. So I see that the Director General has joined us. So
yes, good afternoon, everybody.
So thank you very much, DG. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. For me, it's really a pleasure to meet you today. And I think the idea of this specific town halls for different services is very, very important. And I would like to start once again with really thanking all of you for the great work you've been doing always. But since the pandemic started, I would like really to salute your results, your professionalism, your dedication, your resilience, and also the capacity for innovation. Because really you showed last year and are showing this year the great devotion to your work and the capacity really to use new technologies. And I'm very happy that the results of our last year and the capacity of many of UN entities to carry out, to implement their mandates were crucially dependent on your work. So thank you once again. Of course, there are quite a number of issues which are worrying you, and we had a special meeting with the Staff Council quite recently, and they also raised issues pertaining to language service. I know, and I've seen, of course, the letter or the Staff Council to the Secretary General, and I am in communication with my colleagues here and also in New York to prepare an answer. But before we'll be able to reply on all these issues, I would just to say that we really think that all of us are in the same boat. We are not well staff and managers, and I think that you as a staff can have full confidence in managers, because I really see how managers are really working very, very hard to find solutions for very different issues. I know that the issue of the increase of workload is preoccupying. My position is very clear. We have the decision of the General Assembly, and we have to implement this decision. But there are always ways how to implement this decision in full compliance with the decision of General Assembly, but without sacrificing either quality of the work or the well-being of the staff. And so I'm really looking forward to working with you, to working with the colleagues to find the solutions to this dilemma. Once again, I would like to say that though the situation here in Switzerland is improving, and we hope to resume more and more hybrid or in-person meetings in the months to come, we still have to be very, very vigilant. And I would like once again to say that we are not going to sacrifice the health of the staff or the visitors or the delegates. So all the necessary measures will always be in case. Having said that, I would return the floor to Kira. Thank you very much. Once again, thank you for the work you are doing, and you can count on us to work together with you to find all the necessary solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG, for your words of support. I know that means a lot to everyone. We really appreciate your active engagement and, of course, your very continued and very detailed attention to the work of COVID. I think we've Geneva's, I think, done actually quite a good job with that. So it's very much to credit to you and your team. So let's go ahead and start with the presentation, please. Thanks very much, Olga. Let's next slide. So for those of you who were kind enough to come to the general town hall meeting, there'll be a little bit of a rehash of what we said before. But I know that not everybody was able to make the time, so I'll try to go through relatively quickly on this. If I am speaking too fast, please feel free to put a note in the chat, because I know I get enthusiastic and sometimes I go too quickly. So the first achievement we have here is in bold, and this very much echoes what, as the Director General had said, the service, languages service, really did an amazing job under very difficult situation last year. You know, when the Palais closed on March 16th, it wasn't really clear what was going to happen, but, you know, people were asked, take your laptops home. And very quickly, people were able to transition to working 100% remotely. And I remember that period because my kids were home and people had kids home, and you had situations, it wasn't clear what was happening, and that wasn't straightforward at all. So it's very much a credit to the work that people did that we produced over 90% of the regular documentation workload. And this was done at very, very high standards of compliance. We were hitting basically 100% issuance. So that's really an amazing, amazing job. Some of the other achievements, UNOG was the first duty station to resume official meetings. This was in June 2020 with an UNCTAD event. This, of course, we've had, and you'll see by the statistics, we haven't been able to have anywhere near as many meetings as we did, but we were supposed to. But we did get started. 46th session of the Human Rights Council, that was the one that closed in the first part of this year, was held in hybrid format for the first time with fully electronic voting. And I've been in meetings with the president of the HRC, the previous president and now this president, and they have been very appreciative of the support that UNOG has given them as they've had to navigate these changes as well. We did 4,274 meetings last year, so this was, and remember, the first quarter pretty much was the same. You know, January, February was the same. But you can see that 46% of the meetings were done in virtual or hybrid format, and 39% of these of those, that it was a 39% of the 2019 volume. So that's been a big reduction, and that's been a real challenge for our colleagues in the Substantive Secretariat. But it's very much with the support and the full engagement with colleagues with DOA that they've been able to continue to add conference rooms, able to do the hybrid meeting. So everyone's doing their best, but we still are even now in a situation where we don't have enough conferencing capacity to meet the need. And this is going to be future complicated further with SHP. So far this year, year to date, we've done 703 meetings with interpretation. So we're doing meetings, but again, it's very much at a reduced level. Next slide, please. So one of the things I thought would be useful to go through, I know that you have recently been through the work plan exercise, and I want to thank everybody in LS who's done really certainly exemplary work on moving forward the work plans for the 2021-2022 work plan cycle. These are the overall divisional priorities. So, and we use kind of fancy UN words here, but pretty much the first idea is we want to make sure we have enough money to pay salaries and meet our mandates. That's the main priority. Fortunately, this year is a lot less squeezed than last year. We want to support staff through evolving challenges, and the DG touched on some of those. We have technology challenges, we have issues with the hybrid and how that's playing out, and of course the change in the workload standard. Focusing on client needs, we want to really understand what substantive secretariats and delegates need now. And of course, what people thought they needed before COVID has changed somewhat since COVID. So some of the things that maybe people thought were important are less interesting, and lots of new opportunities have opened up. We're going to be putting together an update to the Conferencing on Today and Tomorrow study, the one that Corinne had done, which was very valuable and uncovered some ideas for new projects. We're going to revive that and use it in a way as a lessons learned document to understand how we can work better after COVID, what to keep and what maybe we can move on. Drawing benefits from technology, et cetera. This is sort of already been touched on, but it's effectively making smart use of new tools. Reaching out with partnerships. You know, if we didn't have our close relationship with DOA, we would have had much, would have been much harder to do as much as we did. Using facts to make decisions. This is basically what the data information is. And this is really important because people will hear things, or you'll hear things, or you'll have an experience that happens to you, and that of course is very important to you, but your experience may not necessarily be typical. So this is where it's good to actually get data and see, well, what's going on in a broader situation, and then make decisions based on that. Mainstreaming multilingualism. I'm fortunate to be the focal point for multilingualism at UNOG. And this is a lot of work that Michelle has done to stand up a group that we've already reached out asking for volunteers for a multilingualism action team, comparable to what has been done with the disability inclusion team, to try to actually mainstream this more and move some things forward concretely. And then promoting inclusion and accessibility. We're waiting for the overall organizational framework that's going to come out of the working group they're doing on racism, but in the interim, there may be opportunities for us to do things as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide, there's 4 lines and there's basically 4 points. So I've already touched on the point that LS has done an amazing job in hitting its issuance compliance. And this is through, you know, there's a cost for things, there's how long it takes for things, and then there's the quality for things. And sometimes this is called the consultant's iron triangle. But what this shows is that there's been a big priority, a big effort put on issuance compliance, timeliness. And so that as the priority shifted, the service responded, and we're hitting 100%. This is a really large achievement. When I joined the UN in 2007, there was a huge backlog, and the timeliness was quite poor. So over time, this is evolution over 10 years, you can see how that's changed. Concomitantly, we can also see in the, which line is it? It's the red line. The red line is the budget. So in the last 10 years, while you were doing things more on time, we see that the budget, there was a slight decrease in budget. This was tied up with, and the navy line here is the one that matches quite well with the budget, because documentation and LS is really the largest part of the division's budget. So as the volume of documentation went down slightly, so you can see 100% in 2010, we're at a 6% reduction. There's a 6% reduction in budget. We've had a 13.2% reduction in documentation. So volume has gone down, issuance rate has improved. Cost, well, the budget part has gone down somewhat. The green line is meetings, and you can see there's been an ongoing growth in meetings. Of course, it bends down sharply when we get to the COVID, when we had to shut things down. But this gives you a sense of how things have evolved over time. And I really want to emphasize how impressive it is, the achievement with the 100% issuance. Next slide, please. So we at the way our divisional budget is structured, 89% of the budget goes to post. That's paying your salary and my salary. We have 7.4% of the budget goes to TAM, which is temporary assistance for meetings. And this is to hire people, the freelance colleagues, temporary staff who support us in periods when the workload is really high. And then the 3.4% of other expenditures, this is for contractual services. It's buying computers, it's buying printing, things like that. Overall, it's 126 million has been appropriated. We're expecting to spend 114 million. So the division is quite a large entity. Division of Administration is able to cover their costs for hybrid meetings. This was a big issue last year because even though they were able to add hybrid equipment for conference rooms, it wasn't clear that they was going to be able to fund the operational costs. Fortunately, the controller did manage this centrally, so that is no longer an issue this year. What happens next year, we'll wait and see. You may also recall that in addition to right about the same time as COVID hit, we also had the hiring freeze and the liquidity concerns. It's very much a credit to the controller that he was able to manage spending and cash flow in such a way that we all got paid last year, which I can appreciate, and that we were able to do what needed to be done to a reduced extent. There are, of course, still issues having to do with arrears and things, but at this point, we are not in the same sort of really stressful financial situation as we were last year, and that's a relief. And then the other change that happened in the budget, and I'm sure you're all very aware of this, is they, in the budget document, they increased the workload standard for translation services. And if you haven't seen it, we'll have a slide downstream and Michelle will speak through some of that. But it's always worth reading this information, this material for yourself, just to see exactly what's in there. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, LS is the largest service in the division. There's 327 posts in the staffing table. Overall, so even though it's 327 posts, we only have 284 staff on board. You can see the vacancy rate here as well. You can see the staff distribution. Language service is a majority of P staff, so 2/3 are professional and above, and about 1/3 is general service staff. We have slightly less than half people are on permanent contracts. Continuing contracts is about 1/3, and then a small group, 20%, is on fixed term contracts. So you can see here how the vacancy rate plays out. Next slide. Also interesting is gender balance. This is very important. The Secretary General and the member states have asked that the UN be as much as possible 50-50 men and women. As you can see here, the language service is actually majority female. Other thing that's interesting is the age profiles, and this becomes quite relevant as we look at succession planning. So we're aware, and sometimes this is just demographics. It's not that every section has the same profile of age and other things, but we are aware that a number of people are retiring. You can see here there's 51 people between 60 and 65. So this is both a challenge because those people will be taking their knowledge and experience with them, and it's also an opportunity to respond to the changing environment. But on the whole, you know, none of actually the UNOG itself isn't particularly young, but on the whole, we're people with an awful lot of experience in the service and also in the division. Next slide, please. This is another thing that's relatively new. Now, language posts that require people to have passed a competitive language exam are not subject to geographic distribution and regional geographic distribution from the standpoint of are they underrepresented, overrepresented, etc. That said, we have been asked as part of the efforts to improve the diversity of the organization to keep track of where people are from. So you can see here that the language of service is half from the Western European and others group. And I'm also a member of that group, being an American, 18% Eastern European, etc. one of the things that is being looked at in the globally on DGACM is how we can make sure that we bring in people from other parts of the world to improve our diversity. This doesn't mean that we would say, no, you don't have to have passed the exam, but it does mean is that, okay, of the group of people, can we encourage more applicants? Can we bring more people into the exam? Can, of the people who've passed the exam, when we're looking at hiring, try to bring in the diversity? There's an initiative that DGACM has put together, which I think is an excellent one, called the Global Language Roster. And what this is doing is putting structures in place for doing freelance tests, advertising it through Inspira, and having a global roster. And this is one way to really open up the process to a broader community. We'll see how it plays out, but it's an exciting initiative. Next slide, please. I mentioned a bit about the retirement forecast. You can see here, this is the number of people we're looking to retire between 2021 and 2025. So it's 36 people. So this is not small. Again, as I mentioned, this is an opportunity for us to revisit how we do things. We have to make sure we capture this knowledge and experience and don't let people just leave without understanding what they were doing and transferring that. But it will also be an opportunity for people. There will, of course, be promotions that will result from this. So we'll have to, this will be carefully managed. Just for people to know, we are in the process of evaluating what our next tranche of job openings will be. There was after the hiring freeze was lifted, it wasn't totally lifted, there was a thaw, as I like to think of it. We were able to finish, almost, a couple are still pending, we were able to finish recruitments that had been started before the hiring freeze, and we did advertise some number of posts. We will be advertising another tranche of posts, and then depending on where we are vis-a-vis the vacancy rate, we may advertise further posts at the end of the year. So basically, each time we release a post, depending on who is selected, whether it's an internal candidate or an external candidate, this changes our vacancy rate. One thing that we absolutely have to make sure we do is maintain the budgeted vacancy rate. So depending on how things play out with the second tranche, whether it's more internals, whether it's more externals, that will shape what flexibility we have for the third tranche. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was my sort of general presentation overall on the service. I'm going to pass it now over to Michelle, your chief. We got these questions from Laura, and thank you very much, Laura, for passing these to us. So first, I think Michelle will start with this, and then she'll go into some more information about the workload. Then we'll be transferring to Natalia Marinenko, who will be sharing information with us about alternative working arrangements and how this is playing out, because that's very important to people. So Michelle, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kira. So the question that we received from the Language Sectoral Assembly was the following one, and I will read out the question. We would like to know specifically, to increase productivity, our ways of working will need to change. Shouldn't management approve a harmonized set of changes first, applicable to all sections, and then implement the new productivity standards once these changes are in place? So what I've done is that I've put in place the paragraph that is appearing in the resolution, which is, Resolution 75-252. I'll reread the sentences. Welcomes the increased throughput productivity of the translation services at all duty stations. Underline that these productivity gains, enabled over the years by new working methods and technologies, justify revising the current notional workload standards approved in the pre-computer era by the General Assembly, and decides to increase the workload standards for the translation services to 5.8 pages per day. So if you go ahead, please, can you show the next slide, Olga? When you look at the next slide, you will see a graph that shows the 5-year throughput productivity of the translation services by duty station since 2016. So if you go down to Geneva, you'll see that Geneva was at 5.1 in 2016, at 5 in 2017, and then started in 2018, we started to see a progressive increase. So 5.3 in 2018, 5.5 in 2019, 5.8 in 2020, and as of the 30th of April, which is when these figures were put together, Geneva was at 6.1. So in response to the question that was put by the Language Sectoral Assembly, we have already seen an increase in productivity over the years in Geneva. And the reason we have seen an increase in productivity has to do with the change in new working methods. The resolution refers to the pre-computer era. So when I'm asked, well, what are the changes that have already been implemented? Well, we all have computers. Another change that has been implemented is that we all have access to the internet. I know that some of the colleagues that are here with us today remember the time when they joined the internet and they did not when they joined the organization and they did not have access to the internet. And when they needed reference materials, this required a trip to the library. ODS didn't exist for us to download documents. So the second change that has occurred since the second working method that has arrived is the internet has arrived and changed the way we work. So we have computers, we also have access to the internet, and then there has been more recently, there's been a change with the introduction of Eluna, which allows us to retrieve electronic references that exist in our documentation using the tools that we have. So that is another working method that has changed since before the time of the pre-computer era. The fourth working method that has changed since the pre-computer era is that in the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen an increase in self-revision, which is in colleagues working after several years, once they've gathered experience and they work in self-revision mode, and the increase and the transition to an increased self-revision mode, this also increases the throughput productivity, as you can see in the graph here. So these are some of the new working methods that have been introduced since the pre-computer era. Will there be further changes to our working methods? Yes, there will be further changes to our working methods. I'm sure that you're all aware that a pilot project is being run in which they are going to collect data to see if we can change the definition of reprise as it currently stands to a new definition of reprise that would be based on data as it appears in Eluna. Next slide, please. So this is the dashboard with the definition of terms. You may not be able to read this screen because of the size of your laptop. I'd like to remind you that this information was shared in the GText report that was sent to all staff. And I also mentioned, provided a link to this report with the definitions. And I would like to invite all translators to make sure they're familiar with the definitions as they appear here. In particular, I'd like you to take a look at the definitions of Eluna Leverage, the definition of the method for the European Parliament, and the definition for revision only. Next slide, please. So in this report, in this image, what you see is that you see the Eluna report from the 1st of January to the 31st of May 2021. This is a business intelligence report that uses data from Eluna. What this report shows, it shows all locations, and then it lists the number of files, the number of words. It defines what the percentage of leverage is using Eluna Leverage, using the European Parliament method, using the revision only method, and then what it shows is it shows the Eluna Leverage by location. So it's very, I will read the, I was going to say it's very clear, but that's not true because I need to read the slide out. So what the Eluna Leverage is showing, that the leverage for New York is 34%, and we are very close behind them with only a 2% difference in leverage as measured by Eluna. We can also see that there is a 43% leverage for Vienna and a 39% for Nairobi. If you move to the right of the figures that I have just read, you will see that when we look at the 100% leverage, we are seeing that New York has 18%, Geneva has 16%, Vienna has 27%, Nairobi has 23%. So this is the 100% leverage. Then we move to the next category, which is the dark blue category. And we can see that for this next category, which is 99 to 82%, the leverage is comparable for New York, Geneva, Vienna, and Nairobi. The last category, which is the 81 to 65% leverage, this leverage is only included in the Eluna leverage, okay? This figure does not appear in the European Parliament method or in the revision only method. You will see that that is also 6% comparable for duty stations. And then you have the category repetitions, where a segment is repeated several times in this method. So what we can see from this, then below you will have a table that shows the Eluna leverage for all languages, all duty stations. 33% for Arabic, 34% for Chinese, 26% for English, 36% for French, 64% for German, 36% for Russian, and 34%. And then on the right, you will see a further breakdown for Eluna by language. Next slide, please. So this next slide provides the information of the report only for Geneva. And one of the things that I always do when looking at reports is that I look at the overview of the report, but then I will drill down by language to see what is the exact situation. So if I go to the bottom part of this table, I will see that in Geneva, we are seeing a 25% leverage for Arabic, a 26% leverage for Chinese, a 29% leverage for English, a 37% leverage for French. Obviously, German doesn't appear. 35% leverage for Russian, and 29% leverage for Spanish. And there's further detailed breakdown on the right. Olga, can you please go back to the slide that shows the productivity trends? Thank you. So what I can say is that when I look at the productivity trends, some of the differences in the productivity trends are directly linked to the percentage of 100% segments. So what I want to make sure that people understand is that although Vienna may have a productivity of 7.1%, when I look at the leverage in the Eluna by language for each of the chiefs, and this is a table that your chiefs have access to. This is a table that you now have access to. Okay, the information I'm sharing with you, all of you have access to it. This is information that we are looking and that we are taking into account as part of our analysis. Because obviously, if a duty station has a significantly higher percentage of 100% matches that we in Geneva do not have, then this means that we may not be able to reach the 7.1% that is put there that appears in the graph. At the same time, this does change the working methods, and this new way of looking at things is something that we need to take into account. This is something that your chiefs need to take into account, that Eluna focal points and staff need to take into account. So I hope that I have answered the question. If we go back to the question now, Olga, please, which is, what are the working methods? What are the ones that have already been harmonized, and what are the ones that are coming up in the future? The second question is, what exactly is meant by gradual implementation of the standard, and what will this mean in practice for staff? So when we look at the productivity trends between 2016 and April 2021, we can see that there has indeed been a gradual increase within the languages service of our productivity. So what will this mean in practice for staff is that I have asked chiefs of section to make sure they take a look at the productivity of staff for the previous cycle for 2021 and also for the previous year. Last year was a pandemic year, and some colleagues may have seen a decrease in the productivity because of having to, because of the situation that we had to deal with the pandemic. So I have asked them to take into account the figures from last year and the previous years and take a look to see what is required for staff. Do they need training? Do they need support? We want to provide the training and support this year because it is this year that staff will be credited reprise in using the old definition as translation only. And my colleagues have, which are the chiefs of section, have had these conversations. They've reported back to me exactly how many people we have in each section that do not meet the workload standard and what measures can we put in place to make sure this is clear. We're also brainstorming with Mohamed Atiyat and with the chiefs of section. We also invited Laura to discussion to see how can we visualize this information and make sure that you as staff have access to similar information that I have for your individual productivity and what the impact is going to be for you. As to the third question, have the repercussions on other staff, especially desktop publishing units, been considered? Yes, they have been considered. This is something that Anna Beaudovergne, as the chief of the multilingual technology section, is looking at very closely. We also have the evaluation of the desktop publishing unit that took place last year, and we are taking that into consideration as well when we look at what will the future look like for the desktop publishing unit. With respect to the last question, I will leave that question to my colleagues in human resources. Thank you, Kira. Back over to you.
Michelle, this has been very helpful. There's a question in the chat that I think is relevant right now. It says that these graphs reflect only 2021 data. So if we could go to slides, I think it's slide 13, Olga, and maybe Michelle, you could just confirm what period this this data reflects.
Absolutely.
Next one, Olga. Next slide. One more. One more down. There you go.
Okay,
Perfect.
there we go. So you can see that if we look at this table here, I have chosen to display the 1st of January, 31st of May sample. This data has been collected as of the end of 2019. So this information is not available for multiple years. The first date that it's available is 2019. And the reason why I've chosen this representative sample is because this is when the workload standard changed, when we had this information, when the GA gave us the new mandate. And so this is the information that's available, but your chiefs are also able to take a look at this data month by month if they wish. And it's possible to drill down and see how the data varies. When we look at the representative sample further in the past, if we look further in the past, we will see that in Geneva, we have less 100% leverage than New York does. And the reason why we have less leverage is because we don't use Eluna as much as the other duty stations do. We're working on a project to see how we can collect the data as to what percentage of our throughput is indeed used with Eluna and what percentage of our throughput is processed in other ways outside of Eluna. And when this information is available, we will we have some preliminary figures that we're already taking a look at with each of the chiefs, because in some sections what we're seeing is that 75% or 90% of the workload is going through Eluna, and in some areas it doesn't. There's some sections where less. And when I ask the chiefs, why don't they use Eluna? And we have some very interesting conversations as to what areas we would like to have, that staff would like to see developed further in Eluna. And this will also be part of the business transformation plan. Again, I mentioned the business transformation plan both in my newsletter from, I think, 2 weeks ago, as well as to mention that this is in the GTEx newsletter. The business transformation plan is going to take a look at how we use Eluna. There's going to be several town halls organized by language. I encourage you to go ahead and read the business transformation, the presentation of the business transformation plan and how it will be conducted. There was a survey that was being conducted for Eluna use, where all translators within the languages service were invited to give feedback about Eluna and what features were the most interesting and the least interesting. So this survey is very useful. Then I see that Maria has said it will be interesting to see how it varies when the GA resolutions kick in New York and other important batches of documents are processed. You're right, Maria. Just as when New York processes the resolutions, it's the same thing when we process the resolutions as well. When we process the resolutions, our resolutions, we see an increase in the breakdown of leverage. We also see similar increases in breakdown of leverage with certain category of ECE documents. Olga, can you please show the next slide? In the next slide, we can see that French and Russian have a higher leverage than than other languages. The reason why we're seeing a higher leverage for French and for Russian has to do with certain categories of ECE documents where we indeed have a higher percentage of reprise. However, because some of the ECE documents are also submitted with 2 originals, it is not actually reprise that can be used by our colleagues in the translation sections, because these are courtesy, in some case, translations or additional translations that we did not translate. They are not necessarily the most accurate or reliable, and they cannot always be used. So even though we're seeing an increase in the percentage, it's not as high as we would actually think once we drill down and understand the data. One of the reasons why the figures is higher for Spanish than it is for Arabic and Chinese is also because Spanish is often a language that is used within the human rights treaty bodies, which is, while it is not requested as either a 4th or a 5th language for Arabic and Chinese, and that is why the Spanish has a slightly higher percentage. These figures are very close though, and so this is just what I wanted to say about the Eluna report. I hope, Maria, that I've answered your question as to why this sample was used for today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I found that very interesting. I know I've certainly learned a lot, and it's interesting how much data there is available. And I appreciate that you're making it available to people who are interested, because it's always useful to get into the information yourself. But then one has to ask many, many questions to understand the context. So I appreciate the background and context you provided around that. So we're going to switch now to Natalia Maryanko and Human Resources. So if we could have the next slide, please, Olga. And then Natalia will share with us some information. After that, we'll then go to Laura Johnson. Thank you, Natalia.
Good afternoon, colleagues. We have shared the information, but I thought that it would be important probably to give you an overview about alternate working arrangements and flexible working arrangements. There is still a lot of questions. There is still a lot of confusion. So I'll repeat that alternate working arrangements are continuing in Geneva duty station, and they will continue as long as we will keep the maximum occupancy levels. And we also, during alternate working arrangements, we lift co-working hours in order for people not to take public transportation during the peak hours. And we have announced that at least in UN Geneva, we expect that alternate working arrangements will continue until the end of summer. What may change, because you can see that the host country is gradually lifting and easing the COVID measures because more and more population is getting vaccinated. We will encourage voluntary return to the premises for those people who can telecommute. And it will happen when Swiss will lift requirements to telework. For the time being, the Swiss said that they recommend that teleworking is still in place. They lift the teleworking for companies who do regular testing on site. And I have to tell you that we are not planning, and it is across UN Geneva, we are not planning to have regular testing on site of our staff. So we will continue to recommend teleworking for those people who can telework, and we will encourage people to gradually come to the premises, those who are vaccinated, those who are who can work in the office, who do not afraid to work in the office, or who work better in the office. There are a lot of questions for teleworking away from the duty station. You may remember that as in September, since September 2020, we asked everybody to come back to the duty station. We gave at the end of summer sufficient notice to people, and we called everybody who were working outside of the duty station to return back. And we have announced that since September, if somebody, for exceptional reasons, needs to work from outside of the duty station, they can do it under the flexible working arrangement scheme. So this is only exception to our. And they have to submit flexible working arrangements form and indicate compelling reasons. We do have at UNOC flexible working arrangements online tool, which tracks the staff who are working outside of the duty stations. And depending on the workflow, and the workflow in DCM can be a little bit different, but it is the manager who can approve up to 6 months for compelling reasons telecommuting outside of the duty stations, and it can be topped with additional 3 months. The only flexibility which is allowed towards the personnel who request to work remotely at their holiday destination and in conjunction with the travel, it is for a short period of time, and we consider that it is up to 2 weeks. And there is no need to explore the compelling reasons. If somebody goes on home leave and needs to quarantine in the country, or wants to stay a little bit longer with aging parents, or spend a little bit longer time with the family in conjunction with travel, but can work during this time, and this is permitted by the exigencies of service, the flexibility for up to 2 weeks is permitted. Next slide, please. There was a question, what is the impact on entitlements if the teleworking outside duty station is permitted? So after 30 days or more of teleworking outside of the duty station for compelling reasons, and if the person works from the home country, we will discontinue home leave points accrual. And also if the person works from the home leave country and telecommute for more than 2/3 of academic year, we will prorate education grant and special education grant. I put a little note because this question comes back more and more, whether there will be an impact on post-adjustment, or if we change the post-adjustment, the person can continue to work outside of the duty station, because the person will take a burden of this financial loss, but will be able to work outside. I just want to underline that under alternate working arrangements and flexible working arrangements, There is no impact on post adjustment, and this is not just in Geneva, but it's globally, and it is for simple reason, because posts are approved and budgeted for a particular duty station. And if we have to change the duty station, it means that this post is situated in that particular duty station, and this is administratively heavy, first of all, and is not approved. Next slide, please. I just wanted to say that we still continue to protect specially protected people, and we have announced at the very beginning that those people at a higher risk who have special medical condition, breastfeeding colleagues, and personnel who share their households with someone at increased risks, if they are required to work on premises, we still protect them. If the people are required to come on premises, we ask them to provide a detailed medical certificate for the staff member himself or herself, and the medical service would issue the recommendation of how they can be protected and what adjustments should be made to those people. While saying this, we are still protecting this population, but as the vaccination is taking over, we also envisage that these special measures introduced by the host country may be lifted, and we will be relying both on the recommendations from this host country and also on the recommendations from UN Geneva Medical Network to move with the issue. And if both host country and our UN Medical Network will recommend to lift those special protection measures, we will lift them. I wanted to remind you about vaccination. It is not a precondition for a physical return to work on site. It is strongly encouraged. There were many questions whether we will do anything if people do not want to get vaccinated, whether they will be barred access. No, they will not be barred access. This remains the personal matter for everyone to get a decision to get vaccinated or not. It is the vaccination protects us from the severe consequences of COVID, and that's why we encourage people to vaccinate, but we will still be encouraging the other safety protection measures like physical distances, washing hands often, and wearing masks in open spaces. And it's a personal, as I said, that vaccination is voluntary. People do not need to say whether they are vaccinated or not vaccinated. This information is confidential, but we ask those people who are vaccinated to report in the confidential EarthMed portal. And this is done not to trace each and every one, but it's done to evaluate overall risks of the organization. Next slide, please. Given the short time, I wanted to put this slide to just as a reminder about annual leave, what is allowed about annual leave, what is allowed to carry over annual leave, up to 15 days annual leave to be used by 31st December 2021. But anybody who is separating from service will only be able to be paid either 60 days on a regular contract, permanent or fixed term, or 18 days if on the temporary short-term contract. There is a little reminder about travel abroad, and travel abroad, and about uncertified sick leave entitlement. This cycle, we only do have additional 3 days of uncertified sick leave until 31st March 2022. Please remember that uncertified sick leave entitlement is taken out of the overall sick leave quota. 195 days with full pay over last 4 years for regular staff, and permanent continuing and fixed term appointments, and who are working for more than 4 years for more than 3 years in the organizations. For those who are working under 3 years in the organization, it is 65 days over the last year. Next slide, please. I wanted to touch, and I saw that there was a question of staff representatives. What would be our future of work after hour? It's a little bit different angle of what they asked, because staff representatives asked about new contractual modalities. I will talk to you about our situation. When we will return to the existing flexible working arrangement options, teleworking outside of the duty stations will remain as it is now. It will remain exceptional and time limited. We do have, I think COVID changed our habits and habits of how we are working, and those who were not adapters of the telecommuting became adapters of telecommuting. So we do expect, and we already have a proof from the staff survey, that both managers and staff are expecting that everybody will be big majority will be working remotely at least 1 to 3 days per week. The current policy on flexible working arrangement allows maximum up to 3 days per week. There were fears from staff representatives that there are discussions that to allow like 5 days per week telecommuting. Yes, it's true that the flexible working arrangements are being discussed globally and being discussed at global HR network. But the proposal to work 5 days per week is just one proposal. It's not yet adopted, or it's not yet accepted. And I have to say to you that UN Secretariat is one of the most progressive organization in embracing flexible working arrangements. So for the time being, the policy is maximum up to 3 days per week telecommuting. And of course, future of work, what we are concentrating now, what will be next normal, and how to prepare our support to staff and managers for their work in hybrid teams, because this period has not been easy, and the working in hybrid teams, in the same way as hybrid meetings, holding or interpretation for the hybrid meetings, holding the hybrid meetings is also challenging. So we will be looking into the how to better support staff and managers, what tools to give them, and how to also explain better the balancing between the personal interests and interests of the operational needs and organization. I think that's it for my slides. Maybe I would like to talk. I have seen in the chat that Naima said about, she made a comment about productivity and mentioned about annual leave, that many staff had to forfeit annual leave. I would like to respond to the last part. I cannot talk about productivity, but I can say that we have seen that at the beginning of COVID, and probably the first part of the And throughout maybe the summer, the people were very reluctant to take annual leave, but we have put and we worked very closely with our administrative counterparts in DCM, with the chiefs of services to see and to who did not take enough annual leave, and we had a very strong campaign for the well-being of staff to take use of annual leave. And we have noticed that over Christmas many staff have availed themselves of entitlement to annual leave. So I would like to tell that we do not have much concerns about it, but if there are, we will be ready again to work with the managers and the reports to see who might not be using annual leave, and for the staff well-being to encourage taking this leave, because it is very important, especially during COVID. We are in a better situation and we have hope, but it's not over yet. And we have to be very cautious, as our Director General said. Over from me.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I think that was very detailed. And of course, if people have questions, they're welcome to ask their admin assistants, or they can ask Natalia's team directly. There is a question off in the chat, and this is more about the question of whether or not people are going to be asked to telecommute 100%. I think Natalia mentioned that when the alternative working arrangements are over, we're going to go back to a maximum of 3. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo. I'm wondering if somebody's mic is still on. Let me just check. Okay. But at this point, I think it's important to be very clear that there is no expectation, there's no planning, there's no decision that everybody would be offshored, because this is effectively, right now, COVID is a very unusual situation, and we are all hoping that it continues to be extremely unusual. And when it finishes, we can return to, whether you call it the next normal, the new normal. But as Natalia mentioned, we will be going back to a maximum of 1 to 3 days per week at this point. It is, however, an excellent point, and I think it's worth mentioning, and some of you who are in contact with your colleagues in New York or other duty stations, the U.S. is a few months ahead of certainly Geneva when it comes to vaccination. And what I understand is that there are certain parts of the U.S. where people consider this whole thing is over now. And anybody who wanted to be vaccinated could be vaccinated. So the expectation is, and including by member states, we're back in the office. Why aren't UN staff back in the office? And some of it may be a function of people are really eager to get back to work. And to do that, we need to start having more meetings. Of course, that's a different situation, having more meetings, and this to a sense may reflect the situation in some of the other duty stations where interpreters, for instance, are working remotely, which requires the full weight of the hybrid meeting technical infrastructure. Because, it all seems very easy, whether we're doing Zoom, we have our phone, or we have these Teams meeting, it seems super straightforward. But when you factor in interpretation, you need to actually have a whole lot of backstage infrastructure. So there are discussions in New York about people coming back to work. So member states have noticed, and they are aware. This is one of the reasons why we went, as Natalia had mentioned, for people to be working 100% away from duty station, it really does need to be a compelling reason. Unfortunately, COVID has given many people compelling reasons that they wish did not exist. But while the COVID situation remains, and I'm not only thinking about here in Geneva, the situation in Geneva is quite different. They have a good healthcare system, etc. But there are other parts of the world. We have colleagues who are in India. We have colleagues who, may be in parts of Africa or South America where the healthcare system is not so good, where the COVID pandemic is still raging. So I think it'll be a while before we can really say compelling reasons have disappeared. But I think for me, it is very important that the compelling reasons are unusual. This alternative working arrangement is not to be used because I want to just work from home and spend more time, or my children, I have a second house at the beach and we want to stay at the beach for the whole year. That's not what's intended. And I think people are aware of that. I've approved a number of requests, and I've seen some of the reasons. and they are quite compelling. So I hope that answered. So en bref, because it's hard for me to brief, but at this point, there are no plans to have staff offshored and go work from somewhere else 100%. No. So I hope that answered the question. If not, please put something in the chat. Go ahead, Natalia. Unfortunately, we're kind of over time, and I do want to make sure I give some time for questions. Thanks.
Okay. I just wanted to say that this maybe is a question about future workforce and how future workforce work, but it is premature to say what it is. Having said that, the member states are particularly interested of where the people are working from, and they have requested the UN Secretariat to develop the in Umoja special upgrade to Umoja to indicate where the staff are working from, and that also ties with what I say, that flexible working outside of the duty station is for exceptional circumstances only and for a limited period of time, and there is a good justification for this.
Okay, thank you so much, Olga. Next slide, and I'll try to go pretty quickly on this. So big issues. Okay, COVID we've talked about at length. I think everyone's clear on what that means. Now we're in this sort of, how do we get out of COVID? What do we keep? What do we not keep? SHP, this is a huge issue, and I am extremely intensely personally engaged on this, and this continues to shift. It is one of the 7 core precepts of SHP is business continuity, and that means we need to be able to continue to do meetings throughout the project. So you can rest assured that I am doing my best to raise concerns as appropriate. Plan for return to work, in-person meetings, we've just discussed that. I've also mentioned the CTT exercise that we'll be doing, and we'll be asking for, possible volunteers. We may even be able to use a little bit of TAM to advertise posts, make sure we have resources for that. We've spoken at length about the evolution of our work and meeting our mandates. So this is not only the situation in LS with the change in workload standards, but it's also for our colleagues in interpretation service, because hybrid meetings, there's issues with their hearing. We need to make sure that staff are able to work in that situation safely. We have to implement the new performance management system. I think people have seen there's been some issues with the system, the technical system, as well as we haven't seen the STAI yet, but I commend you for your work so far. We need to communicate effectively with clients and member states. And I should add, we also need to communicate effectively internally, not just within the division within services, but also I make sure I work regularly with colleagues in DOA. I have a weekly meeting with our new ASG, Sheriff Norman. There's a quarterly meeting where they meet with I think it's actually monthly, all 4 duty stations. So we are very much in close contact with our colleagues across DGACM, as well as, of course, our colleagues here across UNOG. Technology needs to work. As some people who know me well know that I do not like switching costs. And if there's tech, it better work for a broader community and not just work for one part of, be convenient for the back office, et cetera. But we will do our best with that. We don't make a lot of independent decisions. If things don't make sense to you, please pass that on to somebody, because either that's a function of maybe we can get better training, or maybe there's something that we need to pursue. And just in that context, there's a couple things. There have been interesting discussions about evolution, about, for instance, how do we use the word black? Is it a capital B? Is it a lowercase b? How do we deal with dual language, dual original submission? There's a lot of things which are sort of marginal cases, but they trigger larger policy aspects. And one of the things that's very important to me is that we look at that and we say, all right, this is going to come up again. Let's figure out how we want to deal with that. But this has gone on. I've gone on far too long. If I could switch to Laura Johnson now, and then we can have a few more questions. Again, if people have questions, stick them in the chat. It allows us some things we can respond to directly. So Laura, please, you have the floor. And Olga, take down the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank you for giving me the floor to congratulate you personally on becoming director of DCM, and saying that I think we really, really have missed having a director at this time. particularly with all this debate around the new workload standard, because I don't think that staff have at all felt sufficiently protected and supported. And one way, I think, in which having a director of DCM could help does relate to something that you said right at the beginning, where you mentioned that one of the priority is to look at our clients' needs. When I hear from our New York management of DCM, I very much have the impression that absolutely the only thing that matters is the delegates to the Fifth Committee. And I think it can be very helpful to look at the actual users of our documents, and to remember that we need to keep doing a good job for them and for the future. I think I would go back to the very first of the questions that we submitted of the in consultation with the Bureau of the Sectoral Assembly about the workload standard, which was saying that to increase productivity, our ways of working will need to change, and shouldn't the change come first before the standard is implemented. I think I want to be clear that what we meant by that is that the figures that we were shown, which said, you know, now that we have the internet, throughput productivity has been increasing, which is what's reported to member states. And so, you know, we've already increased our productivity. If that were the case, then nothing would need to change. What happens is that staff have an individual standard that they're required to meet. I know that many staff in Geneva find it difficult, or certainly will find it difficult when it's increased. And there does seem to be a rather large disconnect here when apparently the reason that the workload standard can be increased is because we have technology. That is, it would be automatic. We would find it easier to work faster. In fact, it seems that the main tool and the main way of thinking that we get from management is that what influences how fast we work is in fact not so much the conditions of our work, but this standard. And that doesn't seem to have very much to do with technology at all. That is, it is just saying, you must work harder. As to the point about then the second, the way of working that hasn't already been in place for years, that isn't just having a computer and having the internet, was collecting figures on Eluna. And I would think that from the perspective of productive staff, that isn't a working method at all. That's a way of counting what we do. And it can have an effect on the real amount of work that we would have to do, or it can't. So yes, I think that I would just come back to that very first question and say that I don't feel that we've had an answer to it. For example, we have been told that we will get more training, but I mean, perhaps I'm very unusual in this, but I've been on a lot of training courses in my career, and some of them have been more useful than others, but not a single one of them has ever helped me work much faster. I don't want to speak for much longer because I'm sure other people have questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Laura, especially for your generous words at the opening. That's much appreciated. Shall we take a couple more questions and then maybe wrap up collectively? As I said, I want to give people a chance to have questions. Unfortunately, I have a child who needs a 16-year-old who needs a vaccination. So I think if we could try it, we'd give it another 5 minutes or so. Do we see any other questions? I don't see anything in any hands raised as participants, but I also know that sometimes what I see on Teams isn't what other people see. So if there's somebody else who has a question, they should just, at this point, just feel free to take the floor. Naima, please.
Thank you very much, Kira. Congratulations, and nice to see all colleagues here and to hear you all speaking and giving information. Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention a very important report that was by the ACABQ in November 2020. It's A/75/7, and there's a paragraph on the impact of the coronavirus disease pandemic, and it is paragraph I-73, and the second part of this paragraph reads, to be very, to do it very, very quickly, speaking about the department, the DGACM, of course, most of the department staff had been working without taking annual or home leave and remained committed to delivering services to member states and all clients in a timely manner. This situation had resulted in an adverse impact on the well-being of staff. However, the committee was also informed that owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, this goes into a different thing. It's about meetings that were cancelled, but it's very important to note that the member states were very, very aware of the fact that most department staff had been working without taking annual or home leave, and this is very important information. The figures that we have seen on the table that says that we have produced 6 pages per day in 2020 is, it's self-explanatory. This increase in productivity is not owed to Eluna. It's owed to the fact that staff did not take annual leave. And I believe that at some point we have to really question not how we are working, because staff have been working really hard for many, even for previous years, we've always done our productivity and we've always done our maximum. This is, as I personally feel it, and as many of my colleagues feel it too, we feel that we have been kind of trapped or rewarded, but in a very negative way for our commitment and for being so productive. The increase in productivity has to be linked to the annual leave that was not taken and not to the performance or the help of Eluna or any other tools for the time being. Eluna has never been audited. It's time that it should be audited. Many member states have requested that Eluna be audited, and they have formulated a request to the SG to do that audit. It's time for all of us to support that request, because it's in everybody's interest. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Naima. Any other questions? Just one thought before I turn over to Michelle, who knows more about the details. So I think, just if I remember correctly, and it's been a while since I've been intimately involved with looking at productivity, but at one point when I was executive officer, I spent a fair amount of time looking into this and working with colleagues in LS. My understanding is that when people are on annual leave, that time is actually taken out of the productivity standards. So if people aren't taking annual leave, then the work that they do factors into it. So in principle, it shouldn't make a difference in terms of annual leave. I certainly feel for people who haven't taken leave. I haven't seen my family for 2 years. And I know we're all looking forward to the summer when we hopefully will be able to get back and see people. But I think from that standpoint, I think the productivity actually does reflect the time that people were working and how much were they able to do. So I don't want to get into nuances about special assignments and things like that, but I just wanted to precise that. Michelle, if you could maybe give a few thoughts on some of the points that that Laura had said, and then I think at that point we could wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think that the situation that we have now is that the workload standards were set in the 70s. The workload standard were revised in the 90s. We didn't work with computers in the 90s. And so what member states have done is that they have recognized that there was an increase in our productivity, as we have reported to them, that was not just due to technology. It was also due to the hard work of staff, to all of the efforts of staff, and the way we have managed the way things are being managed. And that is the difference. The workload standard, as I said, was set in the 70s, revised in the 90s at a time when we didn't have computers. So what member states have done is that they have recognized that we have improved our productivity when we compare it to the workload standard of the 70s and the 90s, and they have brought our productivity more or less to the figures were when we report. When you look at the slide that that was prepared with the latest information that was provided to the ACABQ, you saw in that figure that we included the figures all the way until the end of April, which is the most recent date to which the figures were available, and these are the figures that we see. We see that when all of this information was reviewed by the member states, they had access to the figures of 2019, and in 2019, Nairobi had a figure of 5.8, and the workload standard was brought up to 5.8, which was the productivity that was reported to by New York. And the member states could have reviewed productivity at any point during the past 30 years, during the 90s, the 2000s, the 10s, or 2015, but they chose to do it this year. And I agree that it's tough. At a time when all of us worked extremely hard over the last year, that we went through personal, very challenging circumstances when we were not able to see our family. Several colleagues have lost loved ones, both to COVID and for other reasons, and they were not able to join their families. At the same time, this is what member states decided. Member states are the ones who pay the bills. They're the ones who approve our budget and who give us resources, and they also tell us to what workload standard we should work. The United Nations is a political organization. Member states are sovereign, and we have to do what member states tell us to do. We don't have our own independent governing body or funding mechanism. Mr. Abellion sets policy on the basis of budgets approved by member states, and we can work on things operationally. So that is the reality of what we have. I don't think that my question is going to satisfy Laura or any other colleagues that are here, because this is a difficult situation for both you and for me, and it is and it's definitely not easy. And to me, the whole situation is compounded because of the reality of living through the pandemic. So that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I second what Michelle had said. You know, it is hard. This is definitely difficult. I really appreciate, Laura, that you picked up on the looking at client needs. I think that's hugely important. It's difficult to do, but we will reach out into that. I mean, when I started looking, when I joined, I remember there was the cheap and cheerful discussion. There was a discussion about fit for purpose. All of this continues to be litigated. I mean, and litigated not in the internal justice system, but people feel very strongly about it, and it continues to be discussed. And I think that discussion is really important. And I remember when I first came and looked into some of this, I said, oh, well, obviously, da, 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 da. And the more you looked into it and talked to people and saw how it worked and looked at it differently, you know, it's quite complicated. And again, some of it ties up with the shift. Are we putting more focus on, you know, are we reviewing quality, or are we pushing for this and that? So we have to see, what is it that member states really want? And we will be working that. We'll be working with our substantive secretariat colleagues. We did some of that already. As I mentioned, the small black, big black controversy. There is a lot of engagement with the substantive secretariats about, okay, information, what are things that people are concerned about? And I understand that I think there is a task force on quality. So I know that that's being actively taking forward. If there's something, it totally was worth reading the weekly reports that Michelle sends out. If you're really interested and you see something that seems odd, pass it on to somebody, ask questions, you know. And some of it may just be that you didn't have complete information or there was a nuance that wasn't conveyed clearly. On the other hand, there may be things where people have not realized. So the more discussion, the more dialogue, I think, the better. If there are things that are bothering you in particular or something that doesn't make sense, I often mention that when somebody is new, so for instance, when we bring in new colleagues off the roster, this is the perfect time because they will say, why do you do this? Those are the things that are really valuable insights that those of us who've been in for a while may not see anymore. But again, I would say, so continue to ask questions. I see your point about, I think I understand your point about how the standard, you know, is the standard being used to influence how hard we work? I remember there were discussions a while ago, you know, let's change the standard to whatever, as if it would magically make everything better. But this is why there was that very intensive process. So Michelle got a nice Christmas present where she got to be the chair of this working group. And I think she's done an excellent job. And a lot of effort went into that. So again, there's now a second round of those working groups working on different things that came out of the first exercise. So if there's something that concerns you in particular, please provide input to people. Now is the time to shape that because the discussions are ongoing. And I believe people are really open to hearing what you have to say. That may not be possible to take everything on board, but it's far better to get it out early on. Also, I take your point on board about training. There is training. We are fortunate this year that we do have some resources for training. So if there's something that anybody feels would particularly help them, please pass it on to your chief and we'll see if we can get resources for that. So I know that's, and you know, I know that it's not always easy, and I know that when you're trying to do your day-to-day work, it's difficult to find time for that. But if there's something that comes up, it's absolutely worth bringing forward. I'm looking forward to meeting with Laura, and I have a meeting later on. I think that'll be very useful to have a more in-depth discussion. I don't necessarily have an open door policy, but please, if there's something that you're concerned about, do please feel free to send me an email, chat me on Teams. If I'm not able to respond right away, there's a lot going on. Just ping me again and I'll see what we can do. But it is always a pleasure. And again, I know everybody's working really hard. I don't see opportunities to work less hard, particularly. But what I can do to make it so that we can our work can be as effective as possible, that's really important. The idea is not to just have everybody do things the way they've always done them and just pile more and more on people, because that's not sustainable. The idea is that overall we want to have a sustainable approach, make changes where it makes sense, so that in the long run we can have something that works well for everybody. So let me see, were there any other changes in the chat? Let me just take a quick look because I don't want to neglect any of that. I think that, let's see, I've seen some responses there. I see an email from Antia. Is there any way to let member states know their expectations are unrealistic? Naima said they should talk to the staff council. I can just share with you the member states are well aware of these debates and these discussions, actually. Some of it is provided in detail. Some of it is they get wind of things, etc. But there is an awareness that that there are concerns. And then, yep, so I think that's everything. But thank you all very much. I appreciate everybody's engagement. I'll do my best to support everybody to get our mandates done and to try to get the appropriate resources we need to do our work. And I look forward to working with you in my new capacity. And thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you so much, Natalia, for all of your support and interventions, and the slides. It's very much appreciated. So. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. Thank you.